Every decade, billions of dollars vanish, quietly, invisibly, from the lives of ordinary people. Entire communities lose their savings, pensions, and dreams, and most of the world never even hears about it. You might think this only happens in movies or in faraway countries, but the truth, it happens in plain sight, in industries you trust, in systems you rely on every single day. From phantom real estate funds to software that hides billions, from pension drains to shadowy offshore trades, billions vanish quietly every decade. And it isn't always about greed or stupidity, it's about trust. Systems we assume are safe, auditors we assume are honest, regulators we assume are watching. Yet, despite all the oversight, billions disappear, and ordinary people, the ones who believed, who invested, who planned, are left to pick up the pieces. Imagine working your entire life for a secure retirement, only to open a letter one day and discover it's gone. Imagine saving for your child's college fund, only to realize the investment you trusted never existed. Imagine the money you thought was growing safely, evaporating overnight. If this could happen before, in industries and companies you trust, then what's happening right now? Could it be happening as we speak, to someone you know, or even to you? It was a typical Tuesday morning in Cedarville. Margaret, a retired school teacher in her 70s, sipped her coffee as she opened her investment portal. She had trusted this firm for over a decade, ever since her husband suggested diversifying their savings. The numbers, she thought, should show some growth, maybe just a few percent, but steady, reliable. Instead, everything appeared perfectly stable. No gains, no losses, just the same numbers she had seen yesterday, last week, last month. Something about that stability felt off. I've been careful all my life, she thought. Did I miss something? Margaret wasn't alone. Hundreds of small investors, teachers, nurses, office workers, watched the same screens. The firm promised consistent quarterly returns, no matter how volatile the market, and it delivered, almost too perfectly. During a mild recession, her account barely budged. During a booming market, it didn't spike wildly. "This is amazing," one investor muttered to a friend over coffee. "It's like my money's on autopilot." Behind closed doors, the reality was far less comforting. The firm operated a quiet Ponzi-like system. New investors' money was used to pay returns to earlier clients. Every report, every quarterly statement was automatically generated to reflect stability. Internal auditors raised questions, but were told to focus on tasks, not numbers. One young analyst whispered to a colleague, "They're not lying exactly, they're just making sure we never see the truth." Over months, small anomalies started to appear. Rounding differences, inconsistent timestamps, tiny discrepancies that could easily be dismissed. Margaret didn't know enough to challenge them. "I'm probably just imagining it," she told herself. "These things happen." That trust, the same trust that made her comfortable, was about to be exploited. Inside the firm, executives celebrated. "Quarterly performance looks great," one said. "Keep it going. Next bonuses depend on appearances." Money from new investors flowed seamlessly to cover withdrawals. No one questioned the numbers. The illusion of perfection became a dangerous cage. Eventually, a mid-level auditor noticed the pattern. "The returns are too consistent, too perfect," she murmured. She raised her concerns, but senior management dismissed them as misunderstandings of proprietary strategies. Weeks later, the auditor found herself reassigned, away from the accounts. Silence won over scrutiny. The scheme lasted years. Too many new investors were needed to sustain the payouts. When new money slowed, the structure collapsed like a house of cards. Investors opened accounts to find zeros. Retirees like Margaret stared in disbelief. Over $1.2 billion had vanished quietly into the hands of a few. Lives were shattered. Retirement dreams evaporated. Courts eventually intervened. Some executives faced minimal sentences. Restitution barely covered a fraction of the losses. Margaret said later, "I trusted a system that looked stable, but stability isn't always real." This wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a collapse of trust, proof that confidence without scrutiny can be dangerous. To the outside world, Greystone Holdings looked like a textbook success story. Quarterly earnings were strong, stock prices climbed steadily, business news outlets praised its innovative financial structure. Employees felt proud to say they worked there. Investors felt lucky to own a piece of it. Inside the company, meetings were calm, confident, controlled. No one was panicking. No one was asking hard questions. And that was exactly the problem. What most people didn't see was the maze beneath the surface. Greystone didn't operate as one company. It operated as dozens. Subsidiaries owned subsidiaries. Shell companies loaned money to other shell companies, all controlled by the same executives. On paper, this looked sophisticated. In reality, it was a shell game. Money was constantly moving, never sitting still long enough to raise suspicion. Greystone reported profits every quarter, but those profits didn't come from real growth. They came from borrowing money and calling it revenue. One subsidiary would take out a loan. That loan would be transferred to another subsidiary, then reported as income. The numbers balanced, the reports looked clean, and no one outside the company understood the full picture. Daniel, a junior analyst, was the first to feel uneasy. He noticed something strange while reviewing internal reports. Cash flow looked healthy, but debt was quietly piling up. Where is the money actually coming from, he wondered. When he asked his supervisor, the response was calm and rehearsed. You're overthinking it. This structure is above your pay grade. Daniel nodded and stayed silent. At the top, executives were confident. Bonuses were tied to stock price. As long as the illusion held, they won. The market doesn't care how profits are made, one executive said casually, only that they exist. The shell companies multiplied. Complexity became protection. Then the market shifted. Interest rates rose. Loans became harder to roll over. Suddenly, Greystone needed real money, not paper profits. Debt that had been hidden for years began to surface. The shell game slowed, then stalled. When one subsidiary defaulted, the entire structure unraveled. Investors panicked. Creditors demanded answers. The stock collapsed in days. Greystone filed for bankruptcy shortly after. Losses exceeded $1 billion. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Suppliers went unpaid. Retirement funds tied to company stock were decimated. One former employee said quietly, "We thought we were building something real. Turns out it was hollow." Investigations followed. Executives blamed market conditions and complex financial environments. A few faced penalties. Most walked away wealthy. Greystone's collapse faded from headlines within weeks. But for the people who lost everything, it never really ended. This wasn't a crime of chaos. It was a crime of structure. Proof that complexity, when left unquestioned, can be just as dangerous as deception. This fraud didn't wear a suit. It didn't rely on paperwork or forged signatures. It lived inside code. The company marketed itself as a next-generation financial platform, automated systems, AI-driven risk management, real-time reporting. Investors loved it. Regulators trusted it. After all, computers don't lie, right? The platform promised transparency. Every transaction was logged, every account updated instantly. Human error is the problem, one executive said during a presentation. We've removed humans from the equation. Money poured in. Hedge funds, pension funds, private investors. Billions flowed through systems no one fully understood. Beneath the interface, the software was doing something else entirely. Transactions weren't being erased, they were being reshaped. Losses were delayed, profits were smoothed. Bad trades didn't disappear, they were simply postponed to later cycles. The system didn't fake numbers outright, it simply timed reality to look better than it was. Ethan was a junior software engineer. Smart, curious, careful. While reviewing logs, he noticed something odd. Certain transactions appeared twice. Others resolved themselves automatically, without explanation. That shouldn't happen, he muttered to himself. At first, he assumed it was a bug. Ethan raised the issue during a routine meeting. "Why do failed trades resolve themselves after 48 hours?" he asked. The room went quiet. Then a senior developer smiled. "It's part of the optimization layer. You don't need to worry about it." Ethan nodded, but the answer didn't sit right. External auditors reviewed the platform regularly. Every report came back clean. Because the auditors weren't seeing raw data, they were seeing what the software wanted them to see. The system generated its own audit trails, clean, consistent, convincing. Automation had become camouflage. Then the market shifted. Volatility increased. Trades failed faster than the system could hide them. The software began delaying losses longer, smoothing harder. What started as optimization became active deception. Executives knew, and they let it continue. One night, Ethan ran an unauthorized comparison: raw transaction data versus reported results. The difference was staggering. Hundreds of millions of losses, simply missing. "This isn't a bug," he whispered. "This is design." Ethan reported his findings. Within weeks, he was reassigned, then quietly let go. Official reason: restructuring. The system kept running. The fraud didn't collapse because someone confessed. It collapsed because the system finally failed. A market shock overwhelmed the software. Losses couldn't be delayed anymore. In days, investors realized the truth. Over $1.5 billion had vanished. Investigations followed. Executives claimed they didn't understand the code. Engineers claimed they followed instructions. Responsibility dissolved into complexity. Some penalties were paid. Most money was never recovered. This wasn't just a financial crime. It was a warning. Technology didn't create the fraud. It hid it. And the most dangerous part, everyone trusted the system because it looked intelligent. In the age of automation, fraud doesn't need to lie loudly. It just needs to run quietly. For decades, they were told the same thing. Your pension is safe. Your future is protected. You've earned this. Firefighters, teachers, factory workers, people who spent their entire lives working steady jobs, trusting that when the time came, they wouldn't have to worry. Retirement wasn't supposed to be exciting. It was supposed to be secure. The pension fund was managed by professionals, conservative suits, calm voices, PowerPoint slides full of reassuring language, low risk, long-term stability, carefully diversified. For years, the numbers looked fine. Not amazing, not terrible. Exactly what people wanted. What no one was told was that the strategy had quietly changed. Without notifying beneficiaries, fund managers began moving money into high-risk private ventures, speculative investments, complex financial products, deals that promised higher returns and carried massive hidden risk. On paper, the fund was still conservative. In reality, it was gambling with people's futures. Inside the management offices, the justification sounded simple. Interest rates are low. We need higher yields. Everyone else is doing it. One executive said quietly, "They don't need to know the details. They just need the results." Risk became acceptable. Transparency became optional. A risk analyst noticed the exposure was growing too fast. The models showed a problem. If even one investment failed, the losses would be severe. He wrote a report. It was acknowledged, then filed away. The fund kept moving forward. The first failure came quietly. One private investment collapsed. The loss was absorbed internally. No announcement, no warning. Managers assured themselves it was temporary. They doubled down. Then the market shifted. Liquidity dried up. Risk became reality. One by one, the high-risk investments failed. Losses piled up faster than they could be hidden. Over $1 billion was gone. The beneficiaries didn't hear it on the news. They received letters. Polite language, legal phrasing. Due to unforeseen market conditions, benefits will be adjusted. Adjusted was a gentle word. For many, it meant working longer.
For others, it meant downsizing their lives. One retired mechanic stared at his wife and said quietly, "I did everything right." Some returned to part-time work. Others postponed medical care. The loss wasn't just financial, it was psychological. Trust, once broken, doesn't recover easily. Investigations followed. Managers defended their decisions as reasonable given market conditions. A few were fined, none faced serious prison time. The money was never fully recovered. This fraud didn't rely on fake numbers, it relied on silence, on the assumption that ordinary people wouldn't ask questions or wouldn't understand the answers. The pension drain was quiet, legal, professional, and devastating. Because when trust is misplaced at that scale, the damage lasts a lifetime.
In the heart of a quiet American town stood a bank that everyone trusted. Parents opened savings accounts for their children there. Small businesses kept their payroll funds there. Retirees walked in every Friday to chat with tellers who knew their names. The building wasn't flashy. That was the point. Stability didn't need to advertise itself. The bank prided itself on being conservative. "We don't chase risky growth," the CEO liked to say. "We protect our community." Regulators visited regularly. Reports were submitted on time. Everything looked clean. No red flags, no alarms, just quiet confidence. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Over several years, the bank approved a series of large, risky loans, real estate projects, commercial developments that promised high returns. When those projects struggled, the loans stopped performing. Instead of reporting the losses, executives reclassified them. Bad loans were marked as temporarily delayed. Risk was understated. Losses were pushed into the future. The justification sounded harmless. The market will recover. These projects just need time. There's no need to panic depositors. One executive said softly, "If people lose confidence, that's what actually kills a bank." And so the truth stayed hidden. A senior risk officer noticed the growing exposure. The numbers didn't add up anymore. He raised concerns in a report. The response was polite and final. "We appreciate your diligence," management replied, "but this assessment is overly pessimistic." The report was filed away. Then the market shifted. Property values dropped. Developers defaulted. Suddenly, those temporary delays became permanent losses. The bank didn't have enough capital to absorb the damage. The silence couldn't hold anymore. On a Monday morning, customers noticed something strange. Online banking was slow, transfers were delayed. By noon, rumors spread. By afternoon, the bank's stock was suspended. And then the announcement came. The bank was insolvent. Depositors rushed to withdraw money. Small businesses couldn't access payroll funds. Elderly customers stood in line, clutching paperwork, confused and afraid. One man said quietly, "My entire life is in that account." Regulators stepped in. The bank was shut down within days. Accounts were frozen. Assets were seized. Total losses exceeded $1.1 billion. The community was stunned. Businesses failed. Jobs were lost. Trust evaporated overnight. Taxpayers absorbed part of the damage through emergency measures. The executives responsible issued statements expressing deep regret. This wasn't a loud crime. There were no dramatic arrests, no bold schemes, just small decisions repeated over time. Decisions to delay the truth, to protect appearances, to believe silence was safer than honesty. The bank didn't collapse because of one bad loan. It collapsed because trust was used as a shield. And when that shield broke, an entire community paid the price. In the world of high finance, trust is currency, and this man had more of it than almost anyone else. Colleagues described him as calm, brilliant, almost invisible. He wasn't loud, he didn't chase attention, he simply knew the system better than most. Officially, he was a senior risk strategist at a large investment firm. His job was to protect the company, to spot dangerous exposure, to prevent catastrophic losses. He
He had access to everything: upcoming trades, client portfolios, internal projections, information most people would never see. It started small, a trade placed just hours before a major announcement. Perfect timing, perfect profit. He told himself it was coincidence. I'm just reacting faster than others, he thought. The money felt easy. The second time, it didn't feel like luck. He knew the market would move before it did, and he acted on it. Everyone uses information, he told himself. I'm just more efficient. The line blurred. To hide his trades, he built a shadow network, accounts under relatives' names, offshore entities, automated trades triggered by algorithms, nothing directly traced back to him. On paper, he didn't exist. The profits exploded. Millions turned into hundreds of millions of dollars, then into over $1 billion in hidden gains. Each trade depended on confidential information. Client losses became his personal profit. He watched accounts collapse and stayed silent. A compliance analyst noticed something odd. Trades were consistently moving ahead of major shifts. Too precise, too consistent. The pattern didn't look random. Internal investigators began reviewing access logs. Who knew what and when? His name appeared again and again, but there was no direct evidence. He was careful, almost too careful. The mistake was small. One trade placed minutes too early. One account linked back to an old email address. Enough to raise a question, enough to start pulling threads. He was called into a meeting. Calm questions, polite tone. Can you explain this transaction? He tried to stay composed, but the silence stretched too long. The shadow began to dissolve. Regulators stepped in. Accounts were frozen. The hidden network unraveled. Client losses totaled over $1.3 billion. Employees felt betrayed. He was supposed to protect us, one said. The shadow broker didn't look like a criminal. That's what made it worse. He didn't steal with force. He stole with access, with knowledge, with silence. In finance, the most dangerous criminals aren't reckless. They're patient, and they hide in plain sight. Audits are supposed to protect us, to catch mistakes, to stop fraud. But what happens when the auditors are part of the illusion? At Sterling Financial, a mid-sized investment company, everything looked perfect. Audits arrived on schedule, reports were filed, regulators were satisfied. But appearances were deceiving. Inside the company, managers reassured auditors. All data is complete, one executive said. We've double-checked every number. The auditors nodded, unaware that key documents had been altered. Spreadsheets were doctored. Risk reports were sanitized. Red flags were quietly removed before anyone outside could see. On paper, Sterling Financial was flawless. What nobody knew, some auditors were receiving guidance, bribes, favors, quiet pressure. Not all auditors resisted. Some rationalized it. We're keeping the company afloat. What's the harm? The truth was hidden behind legal-looking reports, official stamps, and confident signatures. One junior accountant, Lisa, noticed small discrepancies. Account balances didn't match transfers. Minor inconsistencies, things that could easily be dismissed as clerical errors. But she asked questions anyway. Her emails were unanswered, or worse, politely deflected. Silence became her answer. Over months, the deception grew. Executives hid losses through clever accounting, loans to related parties, false revenue entries. Audits continued to approve every number. The company appeared stronger than ever. Investors felt secure. Employees were proud. Regulators assumed everything was compliant. Then a whistleblower submitted evidence. Emails, spreadsheets, internal memos showing auditors had been guided. Regulators started to dig. The extent of the manipulation became clear.
Sterling Financial lost credibility overnight. Investors panicked. Stock prices fell. Withdrawals surged. Total losses over $1 billion. Auditors were fined. Some faced career-ending consequences. Executives received minimal jail time. The money, most of it, was never recovered. The fake audit wasn't flashy. It didn't make headlines immediately. It relied on credibility, on trust, on the assumption that no one would check twice. It's a reminder, oversight is only as strong as the people behind it. When trust is bought, even auditors can become accomplices.
It started like a dream, a real estate fund promising exclusive high-end properties across major U.S. cities, promises of steady returns, low risk. Investors flocked. Doctors, teachers, small business owners, all seeking the security they had been promised for years. The presentations were slick. Renderings of skyscrapers, luxury condos, and bustling commercial districts filled brochures and websites. Everything looked legitimate. People invested their life savings, retirement accounts, college funds, generational wealth. Contracts were long, detailed, and filled with legal language. It looked official. It felt safe. "We vetted this thoroughly," one manager reassured a worried investor. "These properties exist, we own them," and almost everyone believed it. The shocking truth? The properties did not exist, not one. They were phantom holdings, registered on paper only through shell companies. The addresses were real, but the purchases were fake. Shell entities moved money between accounts, creating the illusion of property income. Investors were blinded by the polished facade. Some investors began noticing oddities. Rental incomes were consistent, even in cities hit by economic downturns. Property managers were impossible to contact. Reports were always on time, but seemed detached from reality. A few tried to call the fund office, but the line went unanswered. Letters were vague. Nothing seemed overtly illegal, just too perfect. Investigations started slowly. Public property records were checked, accounts were traced. Slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. The fund was an elaborate lie. Hundreds of millions had been funneled through shell accounts. The luxury buildings were digital mirages. Once the truth leaked, panic spread. Retirees discovered that their safe investments had been wiped. Small business owners who had relied on fund income faced immediate losses. Families who had planned for college tuitions suddenly had no backup. Total losses exceeded $1.4 billion. Lawsuits were filed, regulators investigated, bank accounts were frozen, but much of the money had been moved offshore through layers of shell corporations. Recovering the funds proved almost impossible. One couple had invested their entire retirement savings. Their plan to travel and enjoy their later years evaporated overnight. Another family had earmarked the returns for a child's college tuition. Gone. The damage wasn't just financial. Anxiety, broken trust, and despair filled the void. The phantom fund worked because it relied on belief. Investors trusted what looked professional, not what was verified. It wasn't a violent crime. It wasn't dramatic. It was invisible until the damage was done. And the lesson? Even polished promises need scrutiny. In finance, illusions can be sold as reality.
Some opportunities are whispered, not announced. And that's how investors first heard of the dark fund. Exclusive, offshore, high yield. It promised returns that seemed impossible. No brochures, no seminars, just private calls and encrypted emails. Only the right people could invest. The fund thrived on secrecy. Investors were told confidentiality was part of the strategy. Offshore accounts, complex legal structures. The returns were astronomical, and the promise of secrecy made it feel elite, untouchable. People handed over life savings without ever seeing a physical asset. Behind the scenes, the dark fund was a labyrinth. Offshore banks, shell corporations, trusts within trusts. Money moved constantly, making it almost impossible to track. When questioned, managers assured investors, "This is standard for global finance. You are protected." And people believed it. A few investors noticed irregularities. Monthly statements didn't align with market performance. Transactions were delayed, almost as if the system was self-correcting. But when they asked questions, they were told, "Trust the process. This is part of the strategy." Silence disguised itself as expertise. The truth was brutal. Many of the investments were fictional. Money wasn't growing, it was circulating, hidden, and siphoned to private accounts controlled by a few insiders. While statements showed gains, real losses accumulated quietly. The secrecy that had been a selling point became a shield. One financial analyst tried to trace the fund's holdings. Every lead hit a dead end. Offshore banks refused comment. Corporate registries were blank. The dark fund operated like a ghost, visible in glimpses, untouchable in reality. Investors felt powerless. Every attempt at verification failed. When global market conditions changed, the illusion started to crack. Withdrawal requests couldn't be honored. Accounts were frozen. Panic spread quickly. The elite secrecy that had attracted investors became a trap. Hundreds of millions vanished virtually overnight. The dark fund became a nightmare. Wealthy investors, families, and institutions realized billions had disappeared. Regulators struggled to trace the money. Offshore accounts were opaque. Shell companies were dissolved. Many of the insiders were already out of reach. One tech entrepreneur lost half his life savings. A retired couple who had invested for decades saw their plans for retirement vanish. Anxiety, heartbreak, and anger became the only returns. The damage wasn't just monetary, it was trust shattered. The dark fund thrived on secrecy. Offshore, untraceable, and legally ambiguous. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't violent, it was invisible theft. And that's what made it terrifying. In a world where trust can be bought and hidden behind complexity, even the smartest investors are vulnerable. This was supposed to be the ultimate investment empire, a multi-billion-dollar scheme hidden behind layers of companies, offshore accounts, and innovative financial products. The architect, known only as Mr. L, was a figure few had met but everyone had heard of. Calm, brilliant, charismatic. To outsiders, it looked like genius. To insiders, it was obsession. Mr. L's strategy was simple on paper. Create dozens of interconnected entities, move billions through them, report profits that were too consistent to question. Investors were told it was a revolutionary fund. Hedge funds, pension funds, family offices, everyone wanted in, and they trusted him. Inside, employees sensed something off. Late-night meetings, requests for adjusted reports that didn't make sense, small anomalies in cash flow. One analyst whispered, "I can't tell if this is genius or a disaster waiting to happen." No one dared speak up. On paper, the empire grew steadily. Returns were consistent. Quarterly gains looked unstoppable. Investors bragged about their participation. Everyone assumed the numbers reflected real value, but the reality was different. Money wasn't being invested, it was cycled. New investor funds were used to pay returns to earlier participants. Some accounts existed only digitally. Profits were illusions, carefully timed to appear real. Mr. L controlled every variable, and everyone believed him. One internal auditor noticed patterns too precise to be natural. She reported her concerns. Response from senior executives: focus on your tasks, trust the system. Silence became the company's policy. Then the market shifted. Liquidity dried up. Investors requested withdrawals. The system couldn't deliver. The empire was built on timing, trust, and illusion, none of which could survive sudden stress. Within days, billions vanished. Investors lost everything, over $2 billion in total. Retirees, foundations, family offices, destroyed. Mr. L disappeared, leaving only shell accounts and legal obfuscation. Employees were left to face angry clients, and regulators struggled to untangle the web. Families lost homes, retirement plans evaporated, college funds vanished. One young investor said quietly, "I trusted him because he seemed untouchable. Now everything is gone." This wasn't just money, it was trust, security, and years of planning.
The final scheme worked because people believed in legend over fact. Charisma, secrecy, and complexity masked reality. Mr. L's empire wasn't destroyed by outsiders, it collapsed under its own illusion. And the lesson for everyone: in finance, trust is fragile. And sometimes the most dangerous criminals aren't reckless. They are patient, they are calculated, and they hide in plain sight. After reviewing these $10 billion frauds, a clear pattern emerges. First, complexity. Every scheme hid behind layers of phantom investments or manipulated software. The more complicated it looked, the easier it was to deceive. Second, trust. Investors, employees, regulators all trusted appearances. Official reports, polished executives, friendly auditors. Trust became a weapon in the hands of fraudsters. Third, silence. Whistleblowers ignored, warnings dismissed, small doubts buried in paperwork or polite emails. And in that silence, billions vanished. Now, think about today. With AI, automated trading, and increasingly complex offshore structures, could a phantom fund, a shadow broker, or a fake audit be hiding billions right now, out of sight, untouchable? Could your retirement account, your savings, or your family's future be at risk without you even knowing it? The lesson is clear: vigilance matters. Systems we assume are safe are only as strong as the people behind them. Trust is essential, but blind trust can be dangerous. Question what seems perfect. Look beyond appearances. Learn. Stay aware. Knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. Protect your money, your future, your life. If you found this story eye-opening, hit like and subscribe to uncover more hidden truths behind billion-dollar frauds. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case where trust is betrayed and the stakes are real. And comment below, what story shocked you the most? Your insights might help someone spot the next hidden scam.